Hey you, what's up? In the last class, I told you about a type selector, but in this class, you will be learning about a class and then an ID selector. My instructor told me to make a video on that for clarity purposes. I mean, on this type selector which we talked about last time. But when we use the p tag in that type selector, it applies to everything inside the p tag. So, but now we will differentiate them by assigning an ID and classes to each of them. So remember in the last class we talked about this, and then we use this p tag to reference it in the CSS. So, but now we're going to be talking about the class. So class is another way to really reference your work instead of using the tag or the type selector. So I'm going to use class and I'm going to give it a name called my first. So when I save this and go to my browser and refresh this, you notice that everything is still selected, just like we had in the previous class. Now, the reason is after assigning our class by giving it a class name, we should reference this class name in our CSS by changing this from the p tag to the class name which we applied it with. But if I save this and refresh this, it's not going to take effect. Virtually everything will be wiped off exactly like this. So what I'm supposed to do is when assigning a class name, you need to use something, or before you assign the class name, you use something called dot or full stop, as some of you know it. So then with this, you can write the name of the class, which is this. So instead of applying the changes to entire text with a p tag, it's going to take it exactly. Okay, this particular p tag has this particular class name, and that's what is referenced up here. So all these attributes will be referenced or to the p tag, the first p tag with the same name class, um, my first. So now if I go now to my browser, sorry about this. If I go now to my browser and refresh, you'll notice that only the first gets the attribute and the properties there. So the second thing I can also do is to use an ID. Instead of class, I can use something called an ID. So in this case, I'm going to call it my second. So I'm going to go here and change it from first to second. So when I save this and run this program, there will be no effect at all. Now this is because, okay, let me do that. Good. There's no effect at all. This is because the ID name doesn't go with the dot sign before referencing it. It goes with something called a hashtag or hash. So when you're using an ID, you reference it using the hash. When you're using a class, you reference it using the dot. So when I go back to my browser, sorry about this again, and reference it and refresh, so the second paragraph takes effect and not the first paragraph. So this is how you represent it. So but now what I want to do is, what if I want to only apply the attribute to second, just to this particular text here called second, and not to the whole or the entire text? So what I can do is to make something called, I can use a p tag if I want to do that. I can use a b tag, but those tags have certain kinds of attribute. For instance, if I use a b tag, for instance, um, the I want to show you what I mean, and go ahead to refresh. Now you notice that the character is a little bit bold. The B is a little bit bold, but I don't want any of this attribute outside the attribute in our CSS to be referenced. I only want all these attributes to be referenced to it. I don't want anything, any other inline attribute like the b tag or the p tag to be referenced there. So what I'm going to do is, instead of using the term b or any of such, I'm going to use something called a span element. Um, so I'm going to use something called a span. So to give you a hint on what the span does, it's just a container, but it has no direct formalities to the text. There's no special attribute that it applies to a particular any text. So I can say this is a span element. Yeah, this is a span element. Means so when I go back to my browser to refresh this, you find out that this comes by default in exactly this format, just as this by default. Now, no attribute has been applied to this. Everything remains exactly the same as it is. So this is one unique thing about a span element. It doesn't change anything at all. Let me explain again. So if you watch this particular text right here, this is a second paragraph. Now on the browser, you notice um, that this is a second paragraph. This one highlighted here is a second paragraph. There was no break in it because it's a span. So span doesn't have any direct influence on my text, effect on my text. But if I change this to a div, for instance, let me show you the difference to a div element, and then you save this and you refresh, you find out that the div element push the second paragraph down to the next paragraph, but the first thing before the div is still on the first. This is the differences. This is why I don't want to use any other special attribute rather than the span attribute for this particular text. So why do I want to do this? Because I want to be able to reference just the span. So go ahead now and change this from this to a span. Um, so when you do that, you find out that everything in this place is referenced. So everything that has a span element has been referenced. In other words, this span was referenced and this particular span element was referenced. You see that? Everything that was referenced. But that's not how I want to do it. So there's something we call the child element. So this span right here is called the child element. This is the child element of this particular p tag, which is the parent element. In a layman's term, the p tag comes before the span. In other words, the span is inside the p tag. For instance, this is the opening tag of my p tag, and this is the closing tag of my p tag, and yet we have a span inside the p tag. This is why this is called the child element, and then this particular one is called the parent element. So to reference it, I have to just go ahead and just specify the p tag, which is the first parent element. Then I can now specify the child element. So when I do this and then refresh it on my page, you see it does not highlight this particular one, even though it has the the span element, because now I've specified directly where I want it to be applicable. So now I refresh. So as I refresh, you notice this here is gone, but only this is referenced, right? So you can go ahead and still use what I told you about maybe your class in this, and just directly reference only the class. Maybe I'll just call it best of all best. So I can just reference it this format, and it will still work. But there are occasions and times when you don't really need to do that. You don't really want to begin to type much code, duplicating much of this, to just apply once and for all, and everything takes effect. So go back to my browser and refresh this. You see, the whole thing is still, yeah. So this is not referenced because this is a class, and then class comes with a dot sign in front of it. I told you. So before I can now reference it. So refresh and then it takes effect. So you can do it anyhow you want to do it. Just do it in the proper way. So guys, I'll call this a day for today, and then I want you to keep on liking the post and make comments where you don't really understand. And then if the video is good, please do comment, then subscribe, and then watch out for